All right, it looks like we're live. Welcome to another panel for Virtual Indie Book Fest. I am part of A Whole New World Part 1. There's going to be a Part 2 tomorrow, and I have 4 amazing indie authors with me today. They have all written works that, like, I have been reading fantasy since I was, like, 8, a very long time, and I have not seen many of the things that are in these books. So if you're someone like me who's been reading fantasy forever, you need to check out these books because they're amazing. I've been gushing about them for weeks on my channel. So if you watch me, you know. But I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk about how they created these amazing worlds and characters, and just, it's going to be great. So I figure we'll just go in a circle, it's kind of round. So start with Connor, end with Aparna. So this floor is yours, Connor.
All right, yeah. My name is Connor Caplan. My pronouns are he and him. I wrote a book called The Sword in the Street. I'm a quadruplet. I'm mentally disabled, and I write a lot of character-driven sci-fi fantasy sort of stuff.
Hi, I'm Danny, D and Bryn, they, them. I am, queer and disabled, and so I write a lot of queer fiction about disabled characters, mostly like fantasy, sci-fi blends. That are more fantasy than sci-fi, that kind of hit some of that technology and science, because I do have a science degree. I like kind of weird and whimsical, and just anything that, glows and is maybe sentient, even though it's not supposed to be, and fun stuff like that.
Hi, my name is Sahira. My pronouns are she, her. And I write YA fantasy. I debuted last year in 2020, which was a interesting year to debut in. My main character is Muslim like myself, and I'm really excited for the panel. And
Hi everyone, my name is Aparna Verma. I'm the author of The Boy with Fire. I'm an Indian American immigrant. So likewise, I like to write a lot about brown characters who live within the edges, like within the hyphens of identity. And hopefully you'll find a home in my books.
Yeah, I've read all of their works, and they all really have characters you can tell that they love to create. And you guys can correct me as you talk about how you create characters, but it feels like you do put a lot of yourselves into them, or your own experiences, or trying to diversify the character space in fantasy. So the first thing I want to talk about, because I'm just a very character-driven reader and I love so many of the characters I've met, like, how do you guys create and develop these characters? Like, how do you meet them? Like, as someone who is not a writer, I don't know how this works, and anyone can jump in. I'm just like, I don't know how you guys even start creating these people that exist in these stories.
I have a really easy answer. A character either exists or they do not for me. As I start writing, they're either a fully formed person, like right from page 1, or they aren't, and I have to write another book. That is my entire answer. Like, it's just one of those wonky things that it either happens or it doesn't.
Well, particularly for your book. Yeah. Well, I was thinking for Danny's book in particular, you made a character called Cacao, who is a autistic mer serpent. And I don't even know how one comes to one day exist in our world without mer serpents and decide this is the point of view I want in my story.
It sounded like a fun thing. And so I was like, okay, I'll write a couple pages, and his character just really came to life. I was like, this is working. This is enjoyable. He has a huge personality and a strong voice, and lots of flaws, and so I want to see where this goes.
Nice. And sorry, Connor, I cut you off. What were you saying?
Oh no, that's fine. I was saying I'm usually the opposite, where if I'm writing a character, it's almost like it's a math equation that comes in layers almost, where I just have one thing that I want to explore, and I start with that. And then it's just like, what's the least useful situation I can put this person in? And then it's like, and just throughout writing it, just more stuff ends up coming in as I go. I never know, like the way they end up at the end is never going to be the way I start off. It's almost like the process of getting to know someone.
Nice.
Mm. For me, sometimes even like pictures can inspire me for a character. I'll see one and be like, "Oh, that's really interesting," and something will just pop up. Other times, like I might find a name very interesting, and then I kind of go off of that, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, like what does the name mean?" And then I might build on that, and like there's this site that I found. Okay, I'm not sure what it's called now, but it had like personality types, and I'd like kind of sorry, I would kind of develop the character by like their physical features and their voice, maybe the way they walk, and then that kind of grows, and as I rate them they develop. Yeah.
I think of the same way where with Danny in that I like to have my character almost fully fleshed before I even begin to start writing about them. You know, they've been living in my head, they've been talking in my head for hours. That sometimes drives me insane. You know, like I'll probably have lots of short stories or chapters in which I've already developed and gone to understand the character before I really commit to the novel. So for The Boy with Fire, the characters, especially Elena and Yasin, had been living in my head for almost like 9+ years before I really committed to the novel and really understood their whole arc, you know, throughout the book. And with Leo, he was kind of more of a year-long, I think, development. But I think his narrative really added spice and complexity to The Boy with Fire. So for me, it's more so having an understanding the character motivations and desires before I even put pen to paper. And I think it's a great way because you don't have to fully commit to anything. You know, like I think there's that pressure when we're writing. It's like, okay, it has to be great. Like no, it's all living up in my head. It's all vibes before I really have to like put it down.
And
if you look at my series, you'll notice that I take a side character from a previous book and tend to use them as the new main character because I already know who they are and I already know I like them and can write from their perspective. So that is definitely helpful to already have had them like hanging around and be like, oh yeah, this is a character that I understand and I love and can write a whole book about. Anyways, that's all.
no, yeah. Well, now I'm sorry, guys. I'm going off script. I'm going off the questions I gave you guys. But what is your favorite character that you have put together, or the most frustrating, whichever one you think's the most interesting story? And talk about them a bit because I do think your guys' character works are fantastic. So I'm curious about this, especially having read all your works.
Well, my anti-hero, is it okay if I name names? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
I mean, it's up to you. You're the author, so.
Well, there's my anti-hero is Zulshar. He was very interesting to write. There's a lot of him I could say was my past self in a way. So I know we always put a lot of ourselves into our characters too. Well, bits and pieces, kind of, they slip in. But he was interesting to write because he is a very complex character, and he's not, he's a gray character. He's not all bad, and all of us have flaws, and we all have things that we might feel guilty about, and things that we really want. And for him, his motivation is love, and his loss that he feels as well. So it's very it's painful, but also kind of fun to write him. Yeah, he's one of my favorites to write.
He was a really cool one to meet, can confirm.
I think my favorite is also kind of fits into a little like anti-hero box, but probably in a different way than most because it's Ruben. From the outside, he looks kind of like more villainous and charismatic and like your typical like queer Disney villain coded like experience. But then writing from his point of view, he gets a lot more like exhausted and his depression comes out. And I put a lot of myself in that and I relate to him very strongly in like the ways that he like tries, but then kind of fails and backs away from making like big actions and effects on his life or on his world because of how tired and like just kind of emotionally worn out he is. Like his desire constantly to just draw away and to like be by himself with his pets, and like that's something that I've struggled with myself. And he also has a very like poetic point of view voice, which I like to like put a lot of like metaphors and stuff. So he lets
You
me
have
do
me
that.
very excited for your next book, because none of that is in Once Stolen. I know that's in a future book, and now I'm very excited.
It's going to be fun.
I think my favorite character would have to be Edwin, because I'd never written someone that personal, and it was difficult because he was a lot like me. I was putting a lot of, I guess, my dysfunction into like the situation that he was in, and it was difficult because I needed to convey a lot of my own experiences in a way that I'd never done before, and so there was a degree of responsibility that I'd never really had to live up to before. I never knew that it would work until I actually put it out into the world. There was no part of that process where I was sure that I was doing anything right, and so I guess taking that gamble was probably one of my favorite parts of that process.
And what was the scariest part about Edwin, though? I feel like people who haven't read your book don't really even know like how like unique he is to have like in the fantasy sphere. Like,
it's just like he's 90% anxiety. He's just a bundle of raw nerves, and like it really informs just every single aspect of like the way he's seeing and interacting with the world. Like almost every chapter, it's just like there's stuff going on around clearly, but he's like almost completely in his own head. And like, it was something where it's like when you're writing other characters, it's like you have at least some other influence that you can pull from so that you know what you want to do. Where it's like, I'll do a bit of like, I don't know, what Robin Hood did, or Joe Abercrombie, or any sort of name, you have something to pull from. And with this guy, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I didn't have anything to compare it to. I just had to hope that like I was balancing everything appropriately, without getting like, you weren't losing any of the action because he was too far in his head.
what about you, Aparna? I really want to know a lot about your characters.
Yeah, well, I know they're a fun bunch. For those of you, I guess, like for people who haven't read the book and don't have the context, there's three main POVs in The Boy with Fire. One is Yasin Knight, who is an ex-assassin on the run for his freedom, who gets this last chance to win it by protecting the heir of Ravens. The heir of Ravens is Elena Ravens, and she is a badass, I think, female protagonist who is competent. I think I think there's some books where we see female protagonists like who are headstrong and stubborn, but in a way that it can almost come off as grating. But I think Elena does it in a way in which she is competent to a fault, because sometimes her own pride gets in the way of her success, and her ambition gets in the way of her success. And then we have Leo Mulhari Ravens, who is her father, the current tyrant of Ravens. And I think he's unique because he's a 6-year-old guy. We don't often see POV chapters from older characters in general. You know, usually characters tend to be younger. But I think Leo adds a complexity to the story in that he brings a lot of the history of the narrative into the book, but he also adds a certain layer of like, you know, man versus God. That's very, very heightened in his POV versus the other two characters. So for him, I think I didn't really have anyone to base him off of. I think he was mostly a result of more so philosophical musings that I've had personally in terms of religion, balancing what to believe, how to believe, right? Like how religion teaches people to act throughout their life, what morals to uphold, what morals to not uphold, right? And my question when I was writing Leo was, what if the religion that you've put your entire life towards, like that entire religion that you've spent money through donations, through helping build up, suddenly revolts against you? What if that religion gives a prophecy saying there will be a prophet who will kill you and everything you hold dear because you're going to stand in his way? And so that was a very, I think, big, complex question throughout Leo's narrative, in which we see him kind of revolt against the heavens and also struggle with his faith, which I think makes a good read. I think I'm probably biased towards that, but I think he was a fun character for me to write, because him being king, I was able to say stuff and do stuff through his character that other characters could not even begin to imagine, simply because he's the king and has everything under his power, or he thinks that's the way.
No, I agree that Leo added some really cool complexity, and I didn't even think of all those thematic things you were saying. I'm very excited to reread all of your books one day, and especially because I need the sequel to The Boy with Fire, and I know it's not even out yet, and I'm just like suffering over it.
Good. I'm glad. I was like, okay, at least I could tell my publisher, like, yeah, people are going to read book 2. You should have more copies sold for it. So that's great.
Yeah, and so I also love all of the worlds you guys have this in. So maybe we should definitely talk about, because you all have very different settings. So talk about what setting your books tend to be in and how you came up with that, like how you did research or were inspired to ground what you did. Because you all have very different settings, which is my favorite thing, because having read fantasy for a long time, it's cool to be different places with different people and stuff like that.
Well, for me, the Boy with Fire has a blend of both sci-fi and fantasy. I think what's really funny when I see readers' reactions, like, I didn't know there was going to be sci-fi in it, when they start running, reading about hover pods and holopods and game suits and sling sources. Like, I thought this was a fantasy about ancient India. And in a way, I wanted to push against the boundary of what classic epic fantasy was, because whenever especially when a person of color writes about their heritage, it tends to be in ancient times, right? And sometimes I've seen takeaways of readers saying, why do we always have to go to the past when it comes to POC narratives? So I wanted to kind of push the bubble and create a society that is advanced technologically, but is still very rooted in traditions and cultures and the religion from which that technology came from. So in The Boy with Fire, I was very much inspired by Hindu mythology, particularly Ma Kali and Mar Durga, who I think are one of the most badass goddesses of all time, and don't get a lot of rep when we study Hindu mythology. Most Western perspectives go straight to Krishna or Shiva or Vishnu, like the big epic gods. But I think Ma Kali is a goddess who exhibits both this force of necessary evil, in that she was almost like a goddess created to slay demons. And her power she was so powerful that sometimes even the other gods could not stop her. But because of her actions and her bloodlust, she saved the gods from the demons. So I wanted to take that inspiration and use that for the female protagonist that I had. And what is one depicting holy female anger that's not like a Dany Targaryen where she goes mad at the end and burns everything, but a useful female anger that enacts change, and 2, a necessary force that may not be morally correct all the time, but still moves a needle towards revolution and changing that status quo.
Now, I very much forgot that the tagline for your book is Dune meets the Poppy War. I think that's what it is on Goodreads. And I forgot about the Dune part. And then suddenly, like you said, there's all this tech, which I am always wanting future fantasy so much. And I'm like, yes, this is so cool. So
yeah. I wonder if is future fantasy, is that a term now, or I don't know. I've never heard of it.
I am not the one to speak on genre classifications. I make things up. So, I'm not good at it.
That's what we do as a living, as authors. We just make shit up all the time.
Yeah. Well, who else wants to introduce their world?
I mean, I'll go.
Yeah, go.
I said I'll go and then don't know where to start. I guess firstly, like I draw a lot of like inspiration just based off of things that I like. I like the feel of like the 1920s through the 1940s, just kind of that point where people had all like picked up technology like cars and electricity and stuff like that, but it hadn't reached like now where we have, you know, phones and computers. It's just like kind of a fun, I don't know, like intermediate where people were just like building off of technology in new and interesting ways. And I like kind of taking that and adding a fantasy aspect to it. They have like clean power in this world through these rocks that will generate different types of energy, and kind of like combining those into like things like phonographs and typewriters and like fan boats and like just kind of interesting twists on kind of like early mid 1900s technology. And then I also love kind of, you know, tight engulfing cities and giant trees. And so a lot of my settings involve one of those two things. And then I think the final component that my world has is the like reimagining of these mythological species, like sirens, mermaids, naga, different types of characters with like wings or feathers or like selkie. And just taking like various, not so much the myths themselves, but like the idea of these creatures that have kind of surpassed cultural boundaries. We have like similar snake type figures from many different cultures, just because this is something that's so prevalent and interesting to humans. And I kind of wanted to like reimagine my own versions of those and see how it would fit if they had grown up alongside humanity. That we have all of these different cultures and species that function very differently from humans, have different sensory organs and different lifestyles and reproductive systems. And just to see if like they were also developing in this world that was creating this new technology, and like where would it go? How would like interesting stories be produced here? Like what conflicts and stuff like that would happen.
One thing I did really like about your world building that I hadn't seen very prevalent, at least to the extent you do, is because of the sensory organ differences. You have a lot of creatures that don't have ears. So the whole language, a lot of the time, is sign language. And you do it with such nuance that I haven't seen. Like I've seen sign language in books, but like you have a character that stutters in their sign language, which I thought was really awesome. So I don't know. I just really like how you answer those questions that naturally come up in your world building. I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I don't know. I can't help but gush about these works. They're just all fantastic. And I need everyone who's watching this to go look into them. They're in the description. I'm just going to keep reminding you. And just in case you guys haven't seen this comment, my friend has said that their TBR is going to be suffering. So just know. But yeah, who's up next?
Or do you want to go?
Oh, if you can go ahead. Also, thank you.
All right. All right. I don't really have much of a through line for like the stuff I write. Like the thing that the book I published just back in March, The Sword in the Street, was basically just almost contemporary slice of life, wildly contrasted against the thing I'm working on now, which is just all the genre constantly. The only through line I can really find is that like everything seems to be about like the whatever world or framework would best allow me to explore whatever through line I'm trying to get at with the character work. A lot of world building to me comes down to character study, because like someone built this world, and so it's sort of it's like, well, who built it? What biases did they have? How did they build it? And it's just trying to figure out how that informs things and how I can connect that to what I'm going for. So there's in Sword in the Street, there's a lot of there's a lot of conversation surrounding class, and so a lot of the world building surrounds just various forms of exploitation or historical erasure, and figuring out how to navigate that and the products of whatever system is being used.
Yeah, I really liked how your world was used because, I mean, fantasy has a lot of those type of feudal systems where you have to have a patron to exist, and it's very much, you know, thematically tied to, you know, exploitation, like you said. But like also, you know, most of the time when you have those narratives, you're 100% on the side of the main character who is suffering. And you definitely, with your character study, it is a very gray situation often. And that kept me on my toes the entire narrative, watching this person deal with this society and trying to do right by themselves, but also not like descend into greed. I thought that was like fascinating with your world building. So
thank you.
Yeah. And now it's you.
So with mine, I think I should start with the map that's in the book. So I actually drew that when I was 12.
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah. So at the time, I didn't really have like real world influence from it. I sort of just imagined it, and maybe from like back then from this anime that it's inspired by, Inuyasha. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. But yeah, like it was just I was mostly going off of like the adventure and different landscapes and what they looked like, and you know, texture wise, and that's what it was, the foundation, I guess. But then it grew, and now it's inspired by Morocco. So I looked at all like the colors and the patterns and the types of architecture that really grabbed my attention, and that's what I built on it. And after that, when it came to technology, kind of like Danny, I have technology, and like Aparna was saying, it's kind of sci-fi fantasy for mine too. Um, you've probably, like, you know, the gems that they use. Yeah. There's like their type of stone, but it kind of lives off of the energy of the land, so it absorbs it. Yeah. And like there's actually a real world phenomenon. I forget what's called, something like the Schumann resonance. There we go. And that's like the land. I mean, Earth actually has this sort of living pulse, you could call it, or an energy. And I kind of realized later on that that actually exists because I was looking up in research. Yeah, and I was like, oh, okay, so we actually have that in reality too. So it was really fun making up the world like that, and ended up putting technology that kind of exists in our world too. So, and Neza, oh yeah, you're gonna say something?
No, continue.
My main character is actually from our world, so she kind of goes into the fantastical world, and so it starts off with Morocco, like present Morocco, and then when she goes into the other dimension, it's like another kind of Morocco that is influenced by our world. So yeah, and I have other creatures. Like Danny, you were saying, you know, you go off of mythical creatures like that we know, but there's like a twist to them. Mine's sort of like that too. It's people they've never heard of like an angel unicorn before, but but that's what one of my creatures are. Yeah. And like a lot of them, there's jinn as well, and they shapeshift. So I kind of go with like jinn that can look like mermaids, or they look like creatures that we would know in the real world, but they're not really that. They're just disguised as them. Yeah.
No, your story is definitely like a very fun adventure world. Like I could almost see like a video game for it as you like go to each of the locate. Like it's all very vibrant and colorful, and you underplay how much you describe food, and it makes me very hungry. In your
food, yeah.
Like all the scenes in Morocco, I'm like, I just want to see all these flowers and I want to eat all these foods, and so yeah. And we've kind of already touched on this, but like, how do you handle as an author fitting into genre boxes for like marketing and stuff. Because obviously when you're creating the story, you're creating the story the way it wants to be. But we do live in a world with bookstores that like there's fantasy and sci-fi and even down to just like age differentiation between like middle grade, young adult. Like, does the story come first and then you fit it in, or do you create the story while thinking about these kind of arbitrary demarcations that exist in publishing?
Yeah, I didn't think about them until about 6 months ago, which is after I had already written the first 3 books. So at that point, I'm already pretty locked into whatever I had already written.
Yeah.
But it is like a tricky area because like as like a writer and a reader, I enjoy writing and reading stuff that doesn't fit into typical genre conventions. But as a writer and reader who has to then sell books and also find books to buy, it gets very hard to tell, like, what is this book actually about if it doesn't like fit into something that I can search in like a Amazon category or whatever. So it's definitely like a tricky area of trying to just kind of figure out like what tropes are most common in maybe like, are your tropes more fantasy? And so readers who like fantasy are going to like them despite the fact that it's a lot of sci-fi technology, or are they like more romance? And so you want to kind of push that direction, like just kind of figuring out what is going to find your readers the best, I think is what I've been going with. Is that the best way to do it? I don't know. I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say.
I totally agree with you, Danny. For me, it was more so like writing the story that I want to read, and then finding the necessary like quote unquote labels that would best help hopefully other readers who enjoy stories like I do to find this story and hopefully love it as much as I did writing it. So I think one of the biggest challenges that I had, especially with The Boy with Fire, was that it doesn't really follow the typical 3-act structure. I think it's more of a 5-act structure that most Eastern narratives have. So like when I grew up reading the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, like that does not ever follow the 3-act structure. It's more of like a 5-act, 7-act structure process. And so it's interesting to hear readers like reactions to that, because I think some readers, there's definitely a divide where I can see that some people who are very used to the 3-act structure are struggling with the book, and then people who are used to understand the 5-act structure, like enjoying the book more. And I think that's just a gamble that, you have to take as a writer, but I think at the end of the day, the best feeling in the world is when, someone tells you or someone picks up your book and says that they feel seen, that they feel represented in your book. And that they found a voice similar to their own. So I think that for me, like no matter if it gets in bookstores or like sales or whatnot, it's that moment when a reader says, this book, I can see myself in the book. Like, I belong here. That's my greatest, achievement as an author.
I do think you found a good tagline. Like, I'm normally someone who does not like book comparison things because I always feel like they mislead me down a rabbit hole. So, I read Dune and the Poppy War, which I've read both of those books. And I was like, well, I guess I'll find out. And like the sci-fi desert fantasy setting is like very good and even has like the political tensions that I associate with that series, although it's very different, obviously. And then the Poppy War, like that vengeful god, like prophecy nature. I was just like, oh, this is actually very good. This is actually a very good thing. I can confidently say to people like, this has these vibes.
I'm glad. Yeah, we took some time trying to understand. It's like, okay, we need comps because in the industry that we work with, like you need to associate your books with like previous books to help readers find it. And so when we picked Dune meets the Poppy War, it was kind of like a gamble because I think the Poppy War is such a well-loved and mostly a very popular series right now. Dune is becoming popular again because the movie is coming out and I'm super excited about it. So it was a gamble because we knew we had very high expectations. So I'm glad that, you found the comparison to be apt, because I think it does kind of describe some of the mythological, vengeful, but also desert sci-fi vibes.
No, I think it definitely does, especially with like Elena as a character too. And like, I think it actually works really well. I think what's difficult, like you said, with all comparisons is like figuring out which parts of the comparisons are true. Because obviously 2 books are completely different things. Like you can't It's like, well, if it's exactly like the Poppy War, well, then what's the point? It's, you know.
Exactly. And what's funny is that I didn't read the Poppy War until this year. So when I was writing the book, I had no idea what the Poppy War was. Like I had read Dune before. So what's really interesting is that sometimes you'll be given a comp. You're like, I haven't read this book. I should probably read this book. And then I was like, okay, I think the Poppy War does, you know, fit the boy with fire as well. So it's very interesting. And I had a lot of like anxious nights. It's like, is this going to happen? Is this going to work? But thank God it's working.
No. What about you guys and your genre, debates in a world that makes you go in a box?
I think,
sorry.
oh no, you can go.
I was saying that I agree with Danny and Aparna. Like I wrote what I wanted to see in like on the shelves, you know. And at first, when it came to my debut, my main character wasn't Muslim at first, and she sort of was this blank slate in a way to me because she didn't belong to any culture or any faith. But as I kept writing her and more of me did, you know, kind of be a part of her, I ended up wanting to write, like, I kind of want to see myself in stories, you know, and more people started talking about it, like talking about, hey, I want more, you know, stop with too many straight characters. We want more, you know, we want more people that are brown and black and every different faiths and cultures. And then I thought, okay, well, people are starting to want that too. They want to see themselves. And that opened up that avenue for me. And I know for fantasy, like our genre is just so you could say it's nuanced. Like our imagination can kind of, you know, it's free. So I wasn't really thinking of tropes too much. It just sort of happened as I was writing it. And since, you know, reading them too, you kind of pick up on those things as you read books in those genres. And it just sort of happened, like found family and, you know, the romance and whatnot. Yeah. But yeah, definitely I want people of like, you know, like Muslim people, for example, like in my book, to see themselves and be like, hey, like I can be a hero too. And yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone else pretty much covered it. While you're writing, you can't necessarily allow yourself to think about genre conventions too much. It just puts caps on it puts limitations on your imagination. Like if you're working backwards from what you already think the genre is going to be, that's how you get like a bunch of imitations of just Tolkien, and then even importing the biases of the history of various genres. And the only way to break out of that is to sort of jettison everything and just do what you want to do.
Well, yeah, and I think we talked earlier this week how your story is actually almost like a contemporary romantic drama, but with like sword dueling in a fantasy setting, which like, I don't even know how you put that on a shelf. Like,
yeah, that's basically how I go about writing most things, is like, this is basically just going to be like our world, and I'm just going to throw in some fantastical stuff in there every now and then.
Which like I really like, because I'm not a standard contemporary reader. I like different settings, but I also really enjoyed the drama of your relationship. But then it's tricky, right? Because how do we find the person who typically likes the high action fantasy? And that's not what your story is. Your story is a very quiet, tumultuous relationship drama. It's just, which I love, which is why I will keep trying to tell people to read it. But it's always setting expectations with books, I feel, as like a recommender of books to people on the regular. So also, I don't know what Paula was saying too, help. But she says she loves that, so I'm going to assume it's to all of your comments. And you guys were actually talking a little bit about tropes, and as a reader, I have tropes that I love. I have tropes that like I don't love that much, but can be performed well. But I was wondering, as a writer, the tropes that you like to write, are they the same as the tropes you like to read, or do you not even think about tropes and you just like avoid it at all cost?
I'm going to be a little bit mean and say that if you think you have written a book that doesn't have any tropes in it, either you've written a really bad book or you're wrong. So they might not have Western tropes. There are lots of tropes that we're not familiar with like Western English writing that are amazing. And those also count as tropes, even if you can't identify them as tropes. But as far as myself, I don't necessarily go into a book being like, these are the tropes I want to write. I come out and look back and identify the kind of like thematic, like, oh, this is found family. This is like the kind of relationship I've built them up with. Like, this is like maybe not a trope that has a name, but at least it's like the Venom movie relationship between the parasite and the human. Like these are things that have been used time and time again in stories that I have now used because I knew that I had loved them and just seamlessly kind of wrote them in. So I don't go into it thinking, here are tropes that have names and that I want in my books, but I come out and can look back and be like, yeah, this is something that people have written before, and I've put my new spin on it, and I've integrated other things with it, and also hopefully given more like diversity to it, and can then assign bullet points with those tropes and tell people, hey, if you like them, come to me.
Also, Paula had a funny response to what you said, so thought I would share that.
I agree, though. I think every story is just a regurgitation of a story that came before it. Like, there's no like original plot or original idea. It's all, this is why I love studying myth and mythology and understanding some of the structures that came from our very, very old forms of storytelling, because to this day, we're just rehashing those stories with different themes, with different characters who finally look like us, like, who act like us, who talk like us, that are more diverse. But at the core of it, these are stories that we've been telling for generations, and they work because we love these stories. We love, there's always like that hero archetype, but I think more and more we're seeing a trend where we see the villains as protagonists, like with the TV show of Loki, right? We love seeing, I think, more like quote unquote morally gray characters or villains as protagonists, or even enemies to lovers, right? I knew none of these tropes when I started writing The Boy with Fire. I was a novice to like the book community. I was offline most of the time when I was writing The Boy with Fire. But as I started to understand the book community, book Twitter, booktube, bookstagram, I realized that a lot of people love these tropes. And one, because I think it's almost like a comfort, like knowing like what you're going to get out of a story, also to have those trigger warnings so you can be safe during your reading experience. But I also think that when we have a book that has the tropes that we like to identify with, we also strive to see that book push against them, or like add a different spin if they can to the original like storylines that we come in thinking. So I think like for The Boy with Fire, they're like the marketing that we've been doing is like, oh, it's like, more of the great protagonists, villains as protagonists, Dune meets the Poppy War. But I think what's pushing it in my humble point of view is that more so the idea of like the divine female anger, evil as a necessary force for good, and more so the Indian mythology that we don't see a lot of high fantasy sci-fi books really interact with. Yeah. So hopefully, that kind of pushes the grain. But I know, for a fact, my book has elements that other books have. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a celebration of some of the tropes and storytelling concepts that we come to love.
One that is in your book that I don't think is like part of your marketing, and I don't know if it should be, but it was something that like I loved a lot, is like the amount of like palace drama and like just being in a palace. I don't know, like when I read young adult and fantasy, I feel so cozy in like, I don't know why, that royalty setting, probably because that's all the stuff I grew up reading. So like the quiet parts of your story where they're in the palace just interacting, you just get to see the characters pass each other in the hallway and then have an interaction, and you're preparing for this grand event. Like, I love that as well. Like, it's like you said, tropes can be so cozy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think palace and political intrigue, maybe I should add that to the roster.
I mean, I don't know. It's like something that I was like pinpointed, like I'm really liking this part of the story. And I know I'm the one who thinks it's not too slow paced, because I have a lot of my readers like on my channel who are, they don't know, I don't know what pacing is in a book. So like people are like, it was really slow. I'm like, that's the part I couldn't put down, but I love quiet moments. So that's who I am.
Me too.
I think thinking about a trope, at least for me, is if I do it too early, it can cause too much worry and it'll just kill my interest in a book, or writing a book. That to say, but I definitely like everyone else is saying, like you're obviously going to have tropes in there somewhere. They can also be, I think, a bit of a helpful guide during revision, where if anything fits a trope a little bit too cleanly, at least for me, that's usually a sign that I need to be working a little harder to give someone something they don't see quite as often, to layer in some extra elements. But like nobody can do that for every trope out there in a book. So like you're gonna play some stuff straight, just as like a numbers game, you know. And then just like with genre, and it can then become useful once you're done with the book and you need to get it in front of people.
I think it's the same for me. Just there is one trope, the one where the main character, they don't know they have powers yet, but they find them out, like we find them out with them, that, oh my God, I have powers. And it just suddenly comes up. And but with Neza, I didn't do that. I kind of subverted it, and she already knows she has powers, but I show like the reader, yeah, she knows she has them, but instead the struggle is she can't control them. So that's sort of her journey in the book, where she doesn't know how to use them. And it's sort of similar to that trope, but it's just that it's not a surprise to her as much as it is for the reader in a way. Yeah, and like there are tropes, like everyone was saying, I agree. Like we have tropes that, like we're not going to think of them, and they just sort of, they flow into the story, and later on we kind of realize, oh hey, that's found family, and this is like a love triangle happening. So yeah, that's pretty much, I agree. That happens.
I'm trying, so, we're getting near the end and I have like 2 questions, so I don't know if we'll have time for both. So I'm trying to like think of which one I want to ask. I think this one might be fun. Is there a story about your publishing process, either like a really funny one or a moment that you'll always remember? Because I think a lot of you guys have, in the last couple years, like written your like first books, like, either like a high moment or just like a silly story. Because I know a lot of readers like me don't even know what it's like to traditionally publish books, much less, self-publish or indie publish and things like that. So bring some light into maybe the wackiness that can happen in publishing a novel. And if there are no answers, I can ask.
I don't know. I feel like there's so much there's so much to talk about. But I think, Connor, you were just about to say something, so I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I'd never actually managed to see a book the whole way through before I wrote The Sword in the Street, and I actually the only way I was able to do it was I kept trying to I would make every first draft into trying to make it as perfect as possible, and I get like 30,000 words in and be like, this sucks, I quit. And then the only thing I did different there was I wrote a 30,000 word outline, so suddenly I had a beginning, middle, and an end in the space where I normally quit. And then at some point I got so fed up with not finishing what I was working on. I said something along the lines of if this first draft is going to be horrible anyway, then how low can we go? And I wrote a bad draft on purpose. I would end descriptions in the middle of it and just break the fourth wall. Like, I don't need to describe this to you. You know what a fantasy inn looks like, and just move on.
This is so relatable to me while I write my thesis, where I'm like, this is going to be such a bad first draft, but I just need words on page.
Right. Giving yourself permission to suck was honestly the most helpful thing I learned to do.
Nice.
I think for me, some of I'll give you like one example of like a wacky moment and then a gratifying moment. One wacky, I guess, moment was one of the things when it comes to like indie publishing is or with working with a small pub publishers, like there's a lot of like stuff that you have to figure out yourself. Like sometimes at the last hour, you're like called in into some of the meetings with your publishers, like, okay, we have a problem, we got to fix this right away. And one of the things that we found out was the layout. When we first laid out the book, it was like 600 pages. You've read the book. I don't think it's a 600-page book at all, but somehow the layout, and I was like, there is no way, like if we put it at 600 pages, we're gonna have a paperback that's $25. Like that's not, please. I was like having an anxiety attack. I was like, I want my book to be accessible as possible. I personally would not pay for a $25 paperback. So I had to come in like last hour and like change some of the chapter art. So there's chapter art in the book. So in the print book, you'll get to see at the beginning of each chapter and within chapter breaks, some original art bits from artists who I work with. And we had to resize that and change the layout of the book to make it about like 440 pages, from like 638 to like 440.
That feels more correct.
Yeah. And I was like, this is what I think the book is like. So that was interesting and wacky. And I never knew I would know the ins and outs of like book layout, but now I do. I think that's a useful skill if I ever wanted to have my own press. But I think one of the gratifying moments that I had happened recently, where someone reached out to me and said, one of my best friends, like her birthday is coming up. We would love to buy her pre-order your book for her, but we can't afford it. We were wondering if you could send a happy birthday message. And I was like, that's so sweet. It's like, you're her favorite author. She's really excited for your book. Like, can you please send her a happy birthday message? And that, I think, was so amazing. And it makes all the bad days, all the bad layout days, all, the snarky reviews, just, it all like erases it away to have someone like just ask, like, can I just get a birthday message for a friend? That made my entire week.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a sweet story.
I also had problems with formatting. I remember when I was trying to put the map into the book, it went on 2 separate pages, but like back to back once instead of being all together. And when I got the copy of the book, oh wow, I don't remember what the word is now, but the copy. And I was like, okay, let's look through it. And it was on 2 different pages back to back. I'm like, well, this is not good. So I remember I was struggling with that. So that was one part. One thing that's I'm also grateful for. It was just a couple of months back. I sent a message to Fake Crate when they wanted self-published books. And I wasn't expecting that maybe, like I get like, oh, thank you for giving, for the opportunity. We liked it, but not really. But I was so surprised when I got an email from them. And I still remember reading just a little bit of it and freezing when they said, like, it's awesome. And I thought, no, are you sure? Like, are you sure you're sending this to me? Did you get the wrong email? I even had my little brother, like, I literally called him over. I made him read the whole thing because I couldn't believe it. And then he was like, yeah, they're actually going to put it in their box, like the ebook. So that was a really like amazing moment, and made me believe, oh my God, like the book is actually real, like it exists, and like they want it.
That's great.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As for me, I guess like the wackiest thing about this whole process has just been the way that the series has expanded. Because I wrote the very first book in this world to publish serially on my blog for fun. And then I'm getting a warning, your computer's going to shut down. We're almost done. And then partway through the process, I decided that, like, what if I just slapped a cover on it and put it on Amazon? That would be fun, right? Which launched a 4-month, like, just 15-hour weekends of trying to learn to like format and get a cover and get an editor and get it on Amazon and then turn it into multiple formats, and just like it was so much more intense than I thought it was. And I decided that I really liked that. So when people were like, oh, this was a good book, I enjoyed it, are you going to write more? I went, yeah, I guess. And started writing more with the intention that it would just be a bunch of these like cute little standalones focusing on the relationship. And halfway through the new book that I started writing, which is Once Stolen, that's the one that Angela read. Halfway through that, I realized that actually this is going to be a lot more intense, and it's going to start a whole like trilogy following like the world building to figure out why these special magical rocks are creating energy. Where does the energy come from? Because energy can't be created or destroyed. So what is going on here? And like involving later on we involve like scientists, and there's like a bunch of experiments and some fun shenanigans like that, and just like getting a lot more intense than what I thought it was going to be, and expanding out in like wild ways. And just who knew that when I sat down and was like, hey guys, what if I wrote a silly book about a siren and a pirate and put it up on my blog? Would you read it? that would turn into all of this.
I now really require all of the other books because I did want all of the answers to all of these questions. It's so cool. Also, in case you guys didn't see in the chat, we've got cool author group. And they wish you luck. And then my friend's been sewing while listening to you guys, so productivity has been occurring in the world. Yeah. So we have a few minutes left. Is there anything else you guys want to say? It's been really great talking to you guys and reading your works these past couple weeks. And again, I cannot say enough that you guys need to look into their works. Like, go into the description. If you aren't convinced by this, I have videos on the channel talking about all their books that I've been reading. You need to do it because they're really awesome, and I require more works by all of them. Like, Connor, you haven't talked about your newest book, but it's like that sci-fi genre blendy thing.
Oh
that,
yeah,
like,
dystopian thing involving quadruplet royals having a succession crisis.
Yeah, like I want that like tomorrow, but I know it's not written yet. But and Aparna needs to write the sequel to The Boy with Fire because I require it.
Well, it's funny because people who got in the arcs are like, okay, where's book 2? And I'm like, book one comes out in like 13 more days, guys. Hold on, like let's let the world see the first book before I even like. I'm writing book 2, so don't worry, it's happening. But I'm grateful that so many people already are requiring to read book 2.
I mean, I am excited because I'm someone who likes rereading books. I'm a rare person who loves to reread content because I just like the comfort of it. So, I mean, I'm excited that like in a year or two when the second book comes out, I can re-experience the first book. But I still want it to exist. And like, I need...
Well, hopefully you have the print version this time of book
1.
one.
I know. I need that art. Now that you've mentioned it, I'm working towards that. So it's exciting. And you have a sequel coming out for your series too, right?
Yeah.
Is that a duology or is it a trilogy?
It's actually a whole series.
Oh, okay.
I'm planning probably 6 books and a novella. Yeah.
Do we have a name?
Oh yeah. So the first book is Crowning Soul, and the second is Crowning Essence. Yeah. And that one's more kind of a winter feel to it, so it's different from the first when it comes to atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love those, like when you kind of set it in a certain season and you get the really strong feel of that season.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, here's another comment for you all.
We appreciate you too.
Thank you.
And I think with that, we will end the panel. Just a reminder that there are more panels going on today and tomorrow. And if you're seeing this in the future, feel free to comment down below about anything, asking questions. I will answer, and all of everyone's social medias are in the description, so you can follow them. And I highly recommend it, especially because some of them post cat pictures on their Twitter, and I always appreciate authors who post cat pictures. It's like my favorite thing. So we're going to do the awkward waving part of ending a broadcast now, and we'll see you all
Thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you so much.